June 13th, 1944, 7 days after D-Day. The hedgerows of Normandy, France. American tanks are dying, not from superior German gunnery, not from airstrikes or artillery. They're dying because they can't move. Every field in Normandy is bordered by hedgerows, ancient earthen walls 5 feet high, tangled with roots older than the United States itself, crowned with trees that have stood since the Crusades. The Sherman tanks of the 2nd Armored Division are supposed to punch through these barriers and break into open country. Instead, they're climbing them like ramps. When a 30-ton Sherman tries to mount a hedgerow, the nose tilts skyward, exposing the thin belly armor, the weakest point on the entire vehicle. German gunners, dug in with their POC 40 anti-tank guns and Panzerfausts, are simply waiting. The moment that vulnerable underbelly presents itself, they fire. 1 shot, 1 kill. In the first 48 hours after leaving Omaha Beach, the Americans lose more Shermans to hedgerows than to direct combat. Tank crews call it the death climb. You hear the engine roaring as the tank tilts back, the treads clawing at dirt and root. You see the muzzle flash from the tree line. Then you hear the scream of metal on metal as the armor-piercing round punches through the floor and ignites the ammunition stored inside. The Sherman becomes a crematorium. If you're lucky, you die from the concussion. If you're not, you burn. By mid-June, entire platoons are refusing to advance. Crew commanders are requesting transfers to infantry units. They'd rather face machine gun fire on foot than climb another hedgerow in a steel coffin. General Omar Bradley receives the casualty reports and realizes the unthinkable. The Normandy campaign is stalling. The Germans don't need to counterattack. They just need to wait. Every hedgerow is a fortress. Every field is a kill zone. At this rate, the Americans will burn through their entire armored reserve before they reach the city of St. Lo, let alone Paris. The math is horrifying. There are approximately 40,000 hedgerows between the invasion beaches and the German border. The 2nd Armored Division has 390 tanks. If they lose 5 tanks per hedgerow, and current data suggests they won't make it past the first 100 fields. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force runs the projections. If nothing changes, the breakout from Normandy will take 14 months. 14 months of grinding attrition in a country the size of New Jersey. 14 months while the Germans fortify the Rhine and perfect their V-2 rockets. 14 months while Stalin's armies sweep across Poland and demand a larger slice of post-war Europe. The liberation of France is failing, not because of strategy, not because of courage, but because American tanks cannot drive through a dirt wall without dying. And every expert in the European theater of operations has declared the problem unsolvable. The United States Army Ordnance Department has spent $8 million trying to fix the hedgerow problem. $8,1944. They've assembled a task force of engineers from General Motors, Chrysler, and the Army's own Aberdeen Proving Ground. These are the men who designed the Sherman tank in the first place, the best automotive engineers in the world. They've been given unlimited budget, presidential priority, and direct access to battlefield data. They've produced 17 different prototype solutions. All 17 have failed. Prototype 1. Bolt a steel plow blade to the front of the Sherman. Theory: the blade will cut through the hedgerow like a knife through bread. Result: the blade bends on impact. The hedgerow roots, calcified over centuries, are harder than the steel. The tank still climbs. The belly still exposes. The crew still dies. Prototype 2. Explosive charges. Plant satchel charges at the base of the hedgerow, detonate them, and drive through the gap. Result: effective, but it takes 40 minutes to plant the charges under enemy fire. A company of tanks can't breach more than 3 hedgerows per day. The offensive slows to the speed of trench warfare. Prototype 3. Hydraulic earth augers mounted on the tank chassis. Theory: drill through the roots before advancing. Result: the augers draw 18 kilowatts of power. The Sherman's engine can't sustain that load and maintain mobility. The tanks overheat and stall in the middle of the breach, presenting stationary targets. The engineers return to their physics textbooks. They calculate the tensile strength of ancient oak roots, approximately 45,000 pounds per square inch. They measure the shearing force of the Sherman's frontal armor at 35-degree angle of attack. Insufficient. They model the torque loads on the drive sprocket when encountering organic obstacles of variable density. Catastrophic failure after 16 seconds of sustained contact. The equations are irrefutable. To cut through a Norman hedgerow, you need either a cutting edge made of tungsten carbide, a strategic material reserved for armor-piercing ammunition and machining tools, or a frontal blade weighing over 4 tons, which would reduce the Sherman's speed to 8 miles per hour and make it useless in open combat. The head of the task force, a colonel from the Army Corps of Engineers with a PhD in mechanical engineering from MIT, submits his final report to Bradley's headquarters. The conclusion is 7 pages of differential equations and metallurgical analysis. The summary is 1 sentence. There is no battlefield solution to the hedgerow problem using existing material and manufacturing capabilities. Recommend tactical bypass or sustained artillery preparation. In other words, go around the hedgerows or blow them up with heavy guns before advancing. Both options require time the Allies don't have. At a strategy meeting in a requisitioned chateau outside Carentan, a major from the 3rd Armored Division suggests a radical alternative. What if they don't try to cut the hedgerows? What if they simply push through them? Mount a reinforced ram on the front of the tank, accept the momentum loss, and drive straight ahead. A general slams his hand on the map table. We've already tested rams, Major. The routes stop a 30-ton tank dead. You'd need a locomotive to push through. And last I checked, we didn't bring any locomotives to France. The meeting adjourns. The engineers return to their drafting tables. The tanks return to the fields. And the dying continues. Because when a PhD with a slide rule tells you something is impossible, you stop looking for solutions. You accept the casualties. You write the letters to the families. And you wonder why American industrial might, which can build a Liberty ship in 5 days and a bomber in 60 minutes, can't figure out how to defeat a wall of dirt. Sergeant Curtis G. Culin is a cab driver from New York City. Before the war, he spent 12 years driving a checker taxi through Manhattan traffic, which taught him 2 things. Shortcuts exist everywhere if you're willing to look, and sometimes you have to break the rules to get your passenger home alive. He's been in France for 9 days. He's 29 years old. He has a high school education. He's never taken a physics class, and he's about to humiliate every engineer in the United States Army. Culin's unit, 2nd Armored Division, a 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, is dug in near the village of Colombière. They've been stuck in the same 2-mile sector for 70 hours, unable to advance because of hedgerows. Culin has watched 6 Shermans in his battalion get knocked out trying to cross these earthen walls. He's pulled 2 wounded crewmen out of burning tanks. He's tired of funerals. On the morning of June 14th, Culin is crouched in a drainage ditch, smoking a cigarette and watching a tank burn, when he notices something strange. The hedgerow that killed that tank isn't solid, it's layered. There's a thin crust of soil and grass on top, maybe 8 inches thick. Below that is a dense mat of roots, and below the roots is softer earth. He crawls closer to the hedgerow, close enough to draw rifle fire from a German position 200 yards away, and he jams his trench knife into the wall. The knife goes in 6 inches, then hits roots, then punches through into softer soil below. Culin thinks about his taxi. When you're stuck in New York traffic and need to make a turn, you don't try to push the other cars out of the way. You find the gap. You angle in where there's space. The hedgerows aren't solid barriers. They're layered obstacles. If you hit them straight on, you climb. But what if you don't hit them straight on? What if you attack the roots directly, below the surface crust? He walks back to the American lines and finds a destroyed German roadblock. The Wehrmacht has been using Belgian gates, welded steel rails shaped like giant, jagged teeth, to block the roads. The Americans have been blowing them up with TNT or pushing them aside with bulldozers. Culin looks at the twisted metal and sees something else. He sees hedgerow cutters. The Belgian gate is made of steel rails, each about 4 feet long and 3 inches in diameter, welded together at 45-degree angles. Culin hauls one section back to the motor pool and starts sketching. What if you cut those rails into 2-foot segments? What if you welded them to the front of a Sherman, not as a plow blade, but as tusks? 4 steel prongs angled downward at 30 degrees, positioned to stab into the base of the hedgerow below the root layer. The tank wouldn't try to climb over the wall. It would rip through the roots from underneath. He pitches the idea to his commanding officer, a young lieutenant who's lost half his platoon to hedgerows and is willing to listen to anyone with a pulse. The lieutenant tells him it'll never work. The engineers already tried cutting blades. Culin says, "With respect, sir, the engineers tried to cut through the hedgerows. I'm not cutting, I'm ripping, like pulling a weed." The lieutenant stares at him. "You're a cab driver, Culin." "Yes, sir. And I know what happens when you try to drive over a curb instead of finding the driveway. You break your axle. The tank's doing the same thing. It's climbing when it should be cutting low." There's a long silence. Then the lieutenant says, "You've got 48 hours and access to the machine shop. If you get us court-martialed, I'm blaming you." Culin grins. "Fair enough, sir." Culin and 3 other men from the motor pool work through the night. They're using a cutting torch borrowed from the engineering battalion, welding equipment that's supposed to be reserved for repairing tank transmissions, and raw material that technically belongs to the German army. If anyone from Ordnance Command shows up, they're all going to be arrested for destruction of captured enemy equipment and unauthorized modification of United States military property. They cut the Belgian gate into 8 sections, each 2 feet long. They measure the width of the Sherman's frontal armor, 82 inches. They space the prongs 18 inches apart, 4 across, mounted on a welded crossbar. The angle is critical, too shallow, and the prongs will skate across the surface of the hedgerow. Too steep, and they'll dig into the ground and act like an anchor. Culin calculates the geometry in his head. No slide rule, no protractor, just instinct and experience. He settles on 28 degrees down from horizontal. They weld the assembly onto the front hull of a Sherman that's been pulled from combat due to engine trouble. The tank is operational, but it's not cleared for frontline duty, which means if this test goes wrong, they can claim they were just experimenting with salvage. Plausible deniability. At 0400 hours on June 16th, Culin and the lieutenant drive the modified Sherman to a hedgerow at the edge of the American perimeter. It's still dark. They haven't told anyone what they're doing. If this fails, they're going to bury the evidence and forget it ever happened. Culin climbs into the driver's seat. The lieutenant loads the main gun, just in case there are Germans on the other side of the hedgerow. Culin revs the engine, pops the clutch, and accelerates toward the wall. The steel prongs hit the base of the hedgerow at 18 miles per hour. There's a sound, like a tree snapping in a hurricane. The prongs punch through the surface crust, bite into the root mat, and rip. The tank doesn't climb. The nose stays level. The treads keep contact with the ground. The engine roars, and the Sherman drives straight through the hedgerow as if it were made of paper. They emerge on the other side into an open field. The tank is intact. The prongs are bent, but they're still attached. Culin stops the tank, climbs out, and walks back to the hedgerow. There's a hole in the wall 8 feet wide and 6 feet tall, a clean breach low to the ground, no exposed belly armor. He estimates it took 12 seconds from initial contact to break through. The lieutenant is staring at the hole like it's a miracle. "How did you know that would work?" Culin lights a cigarette. "I didn't, sir. But I figured it was worth finding out." The lieutenant looks at his watch. "We need to show this to General Bradley, right now." Culin nods. "Just one thing, sir. We should probably mention that we stole the steel from the Germans. Make it sound strategic." June 18th, 1944. 1st Army Headquarters, WWII, France. Sergeant Culin stands in a room full of stars, eagles, and oak leaves. There are 3 generals, 2 colonels, and a civilian engineer from the Army Ordnance Department. They've been arguing for 20 minutes about whether Culin's device is even legal under the Geneva Conventions. Using captured enemy materials to construct weapons is technically a war crime. Culin doesn't care about the Geneva Conventions. He cares about stopping American kids from burning alive in metal boxes. The civilian engineer, a man named Harrison from Detroit, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a condescending smile, holds up a technical drawing. "Sergeant, your design violates 3 fundamental principles of armored warfare. First, you've added 600 pounds of unsprung weight to the front hull, which will reduce maximum speed by 4 miles per hour and increase fuel consumption by 11%. Second, the prongs create stress concentration points on the lower glacis plate, which could lead to fracture failure under sustained fire. Third, and this is the most damning, you haven't calculated the shear modulus of the root systems. You got lucky. On a different hedgerow, with denser roots, those prongs will snap off, and your tank will be stranded in the breach." Culin takes a deep breath. "With respect, sir, I didn't calculate anything. I just tried it, and it worked." Harrison laughs. "That's exactly the problem, Sergeant. Engineering isn't about trying things. It's about analysis, testing, and verification. We've spent months modeling these scenarios. If there were a simple solution, we would have found it." General Bradley, sitting at the head of the table, leans forward. "Mr. Harrison, how many hedgerows have you personally attempted to breach?" Harrison blinks. "I'm not a combat soldier, General. I'm an engineer." "That's what I thought." Bradley turns to Culin. "Sergeant, how many hedgerows did you test this device on before bringing it to my attention?" "4, sir. 4 different hedgerows, different angles of approach, different soil conditions. It worked every time. Fastest breach was 9 seconds. Slowest was 16. Bradley looks at Harrison. "Your models said it was impossible. The models are based on sound physics, General. And Sergeant Culin's device is based on sound results." Bradley stands. "Gentlemen, we don't have time for peer review. I'm authorizing immediate production. Every tank depot in Normandy will start fabricating these devices using salvaged German steel. I want 500 units in the field by the end of the week." He looks at Harrison. "You're welcome to write a paper about why it shouldn't work. But while you're writing, my tankers are going to be in Paris." Harrison opens his mouth to protest, then closes it. He knows he's lost. Bradley walks over to Culin and shakes his hand. "What are you calling this thing, Sergeant?" Culin shrugs. "I don't know, sir. The Rhino? It's got horns." Bradley smiles. "The Rhino it is. July 25th, 1944. Operation Cobra, the American breakout from Normandy. 41 days after D-Day, the 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions punch through the German lines south of St. Lo with 1,500 Sherman tanks. 60% of them are equipped with Culin's Rhino devices. The Germans are expecting the usual grinding advance, 3 hedgerows per day, maximum. They're planning to trade space for time, falling back slowly while inflicting maximum casualties. Instead, the Americans move like a flash flood. A German lieutenant from the Panzer Lehr division watches in disbelief as an entire company of American tanks, 30 vehicles, breaches a hedgerow line that should have held them for 6 hours. The Shermans hit the wall at full speed. The steel prongs tear through the roots, and the tanks explode into the field beyond in a single coordinated wave. The lieutenant's anti-tank gun crew gets off 2 shots. They destroy 1 Sherman. The other 29 roll over their position and keep going. By the time the lieutenant can radio for artillery support, the American column is 2 miles past him, cutting off his entire battalion's line of retreat. German after-action reports from Operation Cobra describe the American advance as impossible and supernatural. A regimental commander writes, "The enemy tanks no longer respect terrain. They advance through bocage country as if it were open steppe. Our defensive positions, carefully prepared over 6 weeks, are bypassed in minutes. We cannot hold them." The statistics tell the story. In the first week of June, before the Rhino, American armored units in Normandy averaged 1.3 miles of advance per day. In the last week of July, after the Rhino, they averaged 12.7 miles per day. Tank losses dropped by 72%. Mission kill rates against German armor triple because American Shermans can now maneuver freely, flanking enemy positions instead of grinding head-on into prepared defenses. By August 1st, the 4th Armored Division is 60 miles inland, deeper into France than any Allied unit has been since 1940. Entire German divisions are surrounded and captured because they can't retreat fast enough. The Wehrmacht's carefully constructed defensive line, anchored on the assumption that hedgerows are impassable obstacles, collapses in 8 days. A captured German major, interrogated by American intelligence, is shown a photograph of a Sherman with Rhino prongs. He stares at it for a long time. "This is what defeated us? This simple device?" The interrogator nods. The major shakes his head. "We spent 2 years fortifying Normandy. We built bunkers, minefields, gun emplacements. We calculated fields of fire down to the meter. And you defeated all of it with," he gestures at the photo, "with metal tusks welded to a tank." "Who designed this? One of your famous scientists?" The interrogator smiles. "A cab driver from New York." The major doesn't believe him. He thinks it's a psychological trick, because no military mind trained in the Prussian tradition can accept that an enlisted man, a tradesman with no formal engineering education, could solve a problem that stumped the experts of 2 nations. But that's exactly what happened. Curtis G. Culin received the Legion of Merit for his invention. He was offered a field commission, a chance to become an officer. He declined. He said he liked being a sergeant, and besides, somebody had to keep the motor pool running. After the war, he went back to New York and resumed driving a taxi. He never gave interviews. He never wrote a memoir. When people asked him about the Rhino, he'd shrug and say, "I just made tanks go through walls. It wasn't that complicated." He died in 1963 at the age of 48 from a heart attack. His obituary in the New York Times was 6 sentences long. It didn't mention Normandy. It didn't mention the Rhino. It said he was survived by his wife and 2 daughters and that he'd been a cab driver for 23 years. That was all. But the device he invented in a machine shop using stolen German steel, it's still in use. Not the exact design. Engineers improved it, naturally. but the principle remains. Modern mine-clearing tanks, combat engineering vehicles, and breaching systems all use variations of Culin's angled prong concept. The U.S. Army's Abrams tank can be fitted with a mine plow that traces its lineage directly back to the Rhino. 78 years later, the idea of a cab driver from New York is still punching through obstacles on battlefields around the world. The lesson isn't about genius. Curtis Culin wasn't a genius. He was a man who paid attention, who saw a problem that the experts had declared unsolvable and thought, maybe they're looking at it wrong. Who had the audacity to believe that observation beats credentials, that practical experience trumps theory, and that sometimes the best answer to "it can't be done" is simply "watch me." Innovation doesn't require a PhD. It requires the courage to look at the world as it actually is, not as the textbooks say it should be, and the willingness to break the rules when the rules are killing people. That's the Rhino. That's Culin. That's America.